The metal giants walked through the streets again. Their heavy steps made the ground shake. Hansu looked up from her work and counted the seconds between each step. They were getting closer. 7, 6, 5. She whispered as she tied off the last stitch on old Mr. Lee's arm. The cut had been deep, but it would heal. If infection didn't set in. If the old man could rest. If the Kryvax patrols didn't decide to search this block again. Too many ifs. There, Sue said, cutting the thread with her worn scissors. Keep it clean. Come back in 3 days. Mr. Lee nodded, his eyes on the ceiling as the heavy steps passed directly overhead. Dust fell from the cracks. No one spoke until the sound faded. Thank you, Dr. Han, he said finally, pulling his sleeve down. He reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 small potatoes and an onion. It's all I have. Sue took the food with a small bow. It's more than enough. After the old man left, Sue added the vegetables to her small stock in the corner cabinet of what had once been a nice dress shop. Now it was her clinic. The mannequins had been repurposed as practice dummies for her medical students, the 3 local teenagers who were brave enough or desperate enough to learn from her. The building shook again. Not footsteps this time. An explosion somewhere to the east. Then another. The resistance was getting bolder, or more foolish. Sue checked her supplies. Bandages running low, antibiotics even lower. Surgical thread still plentiful thanks to the abandoned textile factory on the edge of town. She had learned to make her own sutures from ordinary thread, boiling it with special herbs to make it stronger and less likely to cause infection. Old ways meeting new problems. The clinic door burst. Open. 2 men carried a third between them, his body limp and bloody. Dr. Han, one shouted. Help him! Sue recognized them. Resistance fighters. The unconscious man was Kim Ji, their local leader. She had treated him before for minor injuries. Put him on the table, she ordered, clearing away her tools. What happened? We planted charges at the fuel depot, the taller man explained as they laid Ji down. One went off early. He was caught in the blast and then one of the machines. He made a grabbing motion with his hand. Sue cut away Ji's shirt. The damage was extensive. Deep lacerations across his chest. Burns on his right side. But worst was his head. A piece of metal protruded from his skull just behind his ear. Get me light, Sue ordered. And water. Boil it first. She worked quickly, cleaning the wounds she could treat easily first. The men helped, following her instructions, without question. In the old world before the Kryvax came, she had been a surgeon at Seoul's biggest hospital. Now she was the only doctor for miles. The head wound would kill him if she didn't act, but removing the metal could kill him too. Hold him still, she told the men. This will hurt him even unconscious. Sue examined the metal shard carefully. It had penetrated the skull, but at an angle. It hadn't gone straight in. There was a chance it hadn't damaged the brain too badly. As she worked to extract it, she noticed something unusual. The metal wasn't shrapnel from the explosion. It was a piece of a Kryvax war machine. It had a faint blue glow and tiny, complex patterns etched into its surface. With steady hands, she eased it out millimeter by millimeter. Ji's body tensed, but he didn't wake up. When the metal finally came free, Sue saw it was connected to thin, wire-like strands that had somehow embedded themselves in Ji's brain tissue. She had seen something like this before in the early days of the invasion. The Kryvax used neural interfaces to connect their organic pilots to the war machines. This looked like a broken piece of such a device. The wound began bleeding heavily. Sue worked fast, her fingers moving with practiced precision. She cleaned. The injury applied pressure and prepared to close it. But as she reached for her regular sutures, she hesitated. An idea formed. A dangerous, perhaps foolish idea. Get me the box under the 3rd floorboard, she told the shorter man. The one with the red mark. While he fetched it, Sue prepared the wound edges. When the box arrived, she opened it carefully. Inside were items she had collected from damaged Kryvax units, small components, pieces of their technology she had been studying in secret. Among them was a coil of thin, silvery thread. She had discovered it could conduct electrical signals like the nerves in a human body. She had been experimenting with it, trying to understand how it worked. Now, she would try something new. This might save him, she explained to the worried men, or it might kill him faster, but without it he won't last the night. They nodded grimly. In these times, such choices were common. Sue threaded a needle with the silver material. It was difficult to work with, both stiff and delicate at the same time. She began to sew the edges of G's wound, but with a pattern she had never used before. The stitches followed the paths of the neural connections she could see exposed in the wound. As she worked, the silver thread seemed to come alive, its ends seeking out nerve tissue like tiny, questing fingers. Sue guided them as best she could, letting her surgical instincts lead her. The wound began to glow faintly, the same blue as the Krivax technology. Hours passed. Sue's back ached. Her eyes burned. But she continued, one stitch at a time, until the wound was closed in an intricate pattern unlike any human suture. When she finished, she covered the site with a clean bandage and straightened up. Now we wait, she told the men. Watch him through the night. If he wakes, call me immediately. They nodded, settling in beside their friend. Sue went to wash her hands, studying the piece of metal she had removed. Its glow had faded, but it still hummed with some kind of energy. Outside, more explosions sounded in the distance. The war continued. Sue put the metal fragment in her collection box and hid it away again. Then she checked her other supplies, made notes of what she needed, and finally allowed herself to rest. She slept lightly, as always since the invasion. Dreams of her old life and soul mixed with nightmares of metal giants. A shout woke her before dawn. "Doctor, come quickly." Sue rushed to the main room. G was awake, sitting up, his eyes wide and strange. The bandage on his head had fallen away, revealing the silver sutures glowing bright blue in the dim room. "I can hear them," he whispered, looking at Sue with wonder and fear. "The machines. I can hear them talking to each other." Sue stared at him, then at her own hands that had created this miracle or this monster. "What are they saying?" she asked softly. "They're coming this way," G replied. 5 of them. Heavy patrol units." He tilted his head, as if listening to distant music. "They'll be here in 3 minutes." The other men looked terrified, ready to run. But Sue stepped closer to G, fascinated. "How do you know?" G touched the silver pattern on his head gently. "I just know. Like how you know where your hand is without looking at it. I can feel them moving through the streets." A slow, careful smile spread across Sue's tired face. "Tell me everything," she said. 6 months passed since Kim Ji first woke up with the ability to sense the Krivax machines. Winter had come and gone. Now spring brought new green leaves to the trees that had survived the invasion. Han-Su's clinic had moved. The old dress shop wasn't safe anymore after a patrol had nearly caught them with G that morning. Now they worked from the basement of what was once Seongju General Hospital. Most of the building above them was destroyed, but the basement remained strong and hidden. "They're moving the big transport again," G said, looking up from the map he was drawing. He didn't need to touch his head anymore to feel the machines. The silver thread Sue had sewn into his brain had become part of him. "Same route as yesterday?" Sue asked. She was working on something small and delicate at her table. "Yes, they're creatures of habit." G smiled slightly at his joke. Sue nodded. The Krivax war machines followed patterns. Once you knew the patterns, you could avoid them, or plan around them. The door opened and Park Dae entered. The teenager carried a heavy bag that clinked with metal parts. His hands were stained with oil and dirt. "I got more," he said proudly, putting the bag on the floor. "A small unit crashed near the river. I got there before their recovery team." Dae had been one of Sue's medical students before. Now he was their expert on Krivax technology. He could take apart the machines and understand how they worked in ways that still amazed Sue. Behind Dae came Lee Min, walking slowly with his cane. The old professor had been teaching linguistics at the university when the invasion happened. Now his knowledge of patterns and language helped them understand the Kryvax communications that G could hear. "Any problems?" Sue asked. "2 patrols, but G warned us in time," Min said, sitting down heavily. "My old bones can still hide well enough." Sue went back to her work. Under a bright light, she was threading a needle with the special silver material they now harvested from damaged Kryvax units. She had learned much about it in the past months. It wasn't just metal. It was alive in some way, able to connect with both machine and human nerve tissue. "Is it ready?" Day asked, coming closer to watch. "Almost," Sue answered. "The pattern is more complex this time." On the table lay her notes, drawings of patterns that looked like the old embroidery her grandmother had taught her as a child. But these patterns weren't meant for decoration. They were meant to speak to machines. "G can hear them," Min said thoughtfully. "But what if we could talk back?" That was the question that had driven them for months. G's ability to sense the machines had saved many lives. The Resistance used his warnings to avoid patrols and plan attacks, but it wasn't enough. "The thread responds to electrical signals," Day explained, pointing to a diagram he had drawn. "Our nerves make electricity. Their machines use it too. If we can match the patterns, then we can speak their language," Min finished. Sue had tested the theory on small pieces of Kryvax technology. When touched with the silver thread in certain patterns, the pieces responded. Lights changed, signals shifted. It worked, but only for simple commands. "I think it's ready," she said finally, holding up the needle. "But it will hurt. A lot." Day nodded. The young man had volunteered weeks ago. They had argued about it, but in the end, they agreed he was the best choice. G was too valuable as their early warning system. Min was too old, and Sue was the only one who could perform the procedure. "Where will you put it?" G asked, concerned for his young friend. "Here." Sue touched her own throat gently. "The vocal cords, where the human voice begins." They prepared the small operating area. Day lay down on the table. Sue gave him a piece of wood to bite on. They had no proper anesthesia, only some alcohol to numb the area slightly. "You must stay awake," Sue told him. "The threads need to connect to active neural pathways. If you sleep, they might connect wrong." Day nodded, his eyes showing fear but also determination. "For my family," he said simply. His parents and sister had been taken to a Kryvax work camp the previous year. Sue began. First, a careful incision in the side of the neck. Then gentle separation of the tissues until she could see the vocal cords. Blood made the work difficult, but G and Min helped, sponging it away and holding lights. When everything was ready, Sue started to sew. This wasn't normal medical stitching. This was art, science, maybe even magic. The pattern had to be perfect, The silver thread touched Day's tissue. It began to glow faintly blue. The boy's body tensed with pain, but he remained still, his eyes open and fixed on the ceiling. Sue worked for hours. One stitch, then another, each placed exactly according to the pattern she had designed. The thread seemed to know what she wanted, reaching out like tiny silver roots to connect with nerves and blood vessels. Outside, the sun set, then rose again. Still Sue worked. Her hands never shook, her eyes never wavered. This was why she had become a surgeon, to heal, to fix, to create. Finally, she tied off the last stitch and cut the thread. "It's done," she whispered, her voice rough from hours of silence. Day's eyes were red from pain and exhaustion. Tears had dried on his cheeks, but he was alive. The silver pattern on his throat glowed steadily, pulsing slightly with his heartbeat. "Rest now," Sue told him. "Don't try to speak until tomorrow." They moved him to a cot in the corner. G sat with him while Sue cleaned up and Min studied the notes. "If this works," Min said quietly, "everything changes." Sue nodded. If Day could control the machines with his voice, the Resistance would have a weapon like nothing before. She looked at her hands. They were steady but stained with blood and marked with small silver burns where the thread had touched her skin. Once, these hands had sewed up wounds from car accidents and removed tumors. Now they created weapons from flesh and alien technology. But was that really so different? Both were about survival. The next day, Day was fever-hot and in pain. Sue feared infection, but the wound looked clean, the silver threads bright against his red skin. "Water," he croaked, his first word since the surgery. As G held a cup to Day's lips, something strange happened. A small Crevax drone that Day had been repairing in the corner suddenly activated. Its lights came on and it rose a few inches off the table. Everyone froze. "What did you do?" Min asked, staring at the drone. "Nothing," Day whispered. "I just asked for water." The drone settled back down as he finished speaking. G was the first to understand. It's his voice, the threads. They're transmitting when he speaks. Sue's heart beat faster. "Say something else." Something directed at the drone. Day turned his head slightly to look at the small machine. "Come here," he said clearly. The drone rose again. Then slowly, it floated across the room toward Day. Moment of silence fell over the room. Then Min began to laugh, a sound none of them had heard in months. "It works," he said between laughs. "My God, it works." Outside, they heard the heavy footsteps of a Kryvax patrol passing by. Normally, they would freeze and wait in fear. But today, G smiled. "Let them come," he said, looking at Day with new hope. "We have a voice now." Sue touched the silver marks on her hands. She had done this. Created this miracle, or monster. She wasn't sure which yet. But she knew one thing. This was just the beginning. News traveled slowly in the occupied lands. There were no phones, no internet. Just whispers passed from person to person, village to village. But even slow news spreads. 3 months after Park Day first controlled a drone with his voice, people began to arrive at the hospital basement. They came in ones and twos, led by resistance fighters who had heard the stories. "Another one today," Kim Ji told Han Soo as she cleaned her tools. "From Daegu this time." Sue nodded, too tired to speak. She had performed the voice thread procedure 12 times now. Each was different, the patterns changing to match each person's unique body. Each time she learned more, made it better, made it less painful. But it was still dangerous. 2 patients had died. Their bodies rejecting the threads or their minds unable to handle the strange connection to the machines. Sue carried those deaths with her every day. "Send them in," she said finally. The man who entered was tall and thin. His clothes were dirty from travel, but his eyes were sharp and aware. He moved with the careful steps of someone used to hiding. "My name is Ryung Ho," he said. His voice was deep and controlled. "I was head of cybersecurity for the government. Before. That was how everyone marked time now. Before the invasion. Before the Kryvax. You're from Busan?" Sue asked, gesturing for him to sit. "What's left of it?" Ho looked around the basement lab. His eyes lingered on the Kryvax parts they had collected, the diagrams on the walls, the small drones that now obeyed Day's commands. "I didn't believe the stories until I saw one of your patients. We call them speakers," Lee Min said, entering the room with a cup of tea for their guest. The old professor moved slowly, but his mind remained sharp. "Those who can speak to the machines." Ho accepted the tea with a small bow. "I saw a woman in Jeonju. She stopped a patrol unit with just her voice. Made it stand still while our people escaped a raid." He sipped the tea, then looked directly at Sue. "I want to be more than that. I want to break their network." Ji and Min exchanged glances. This was what they had been waiting for. Someone with the knowledge to go beyond simple commands. "Why? Should we trust you?" Day asked from his corner. The young man rarely left the lab now. His neck still showed the silver pattern of threads, glowing faintly beneath his skin. "Because I brought this." Ho reached into his jacket and pulled out a small black object. It looked like a mix of crystal and metal with tiny lights pulsing inside it. A quantum data core from their central communication relay. I stole it during a blackout. Sue stepped closer. She had never seen this part of the Krivak's technology before. It contains their encryption keys, Ho explained. With this, and the right interface, we could access their entire command network. But I need a direct neural connection. Something faster than normal human reaction time. That's why you came, Sue said, understanding. You need the threads. Ho nodded. I want the full procedure. Not just the vocal cords, but a complete neural lace. I need to hear them as well as speak to them. The room fell silent. What he was asking was far beyond anything Sue had attempted. The risk was enormous. It would kill most people, she said honestly. I'm not most people. Ho's face showed no fear. And we're already dying slowly. Sue spent a week preparing. She studied the data core Ho had brought, learning its patterns. She designed new thread configurations, tested them on small pieces of salvaged technology, and she explained the risks again and again. The threads will connect your auditory cortex directly to your vocal centers, she told Ho the night before the procedure. You'll hear their communications and be able to respond instantly. But the pain will be difficult, and your brain might not accept the changes. I understand, Ho said. He sat calmly, already fasting in preparation. My wife and daughter were in the first work camp. I have nothing left to lose. The procedure took 2 full days. Sue worked without stopping, her hands steady even as her body demanded rest. The patterns were the most complex she had ever created. Silver threads weaving from Ho's throat up behind his ears and into precisely placed points on his skull. Ji and Min took turns assisting, while Day monitored the small drones they now used as practice targets. If the threads connected properly, Ho would be able to control them without speaking aloud, just by thinking the commands. As Sue placed the final threads, connecting them to the tiny holes she had carefully drilled, in Ho's skull the man's body suddenly went rigid. His eyes opened wide and a sound escaped his throat. Not quite human, not quite machine. Hold him, Sue ordered, but there was no need. The spasm passed quickly, and Ho lay still, the complete silver pattern glowing brightly across his neck. And head, is he? Min didn't finish the question. Sue checked Ho's pulse. Alive, but we won't know if it worked until he wakes. They waited. Hours passed. The glow of the threads dimmed to a soft pulsing that matched Ho's heartbeat. Finally, near dawn of the 3rd day, his eyes opened. He didn't speak at first. His eyes moved rapidly, as if seeing things no one else could see. Ho? Sue asked softly. Can you hear me? His eyes focused on her. Yes, he said. Then he smiled. And I can hear them too. All of them. The drones, the patrols, the command units. He sat up slowly, touching the threads behind his ear. They don't know we're listening. Over the next few days, Ho revealed what he could hear. The Krivaks weren't just using Earth as a military outpost, they were conducting experiments. Human prisoners were being held in facilities across the globe. Something about consciousness transfer. They're not just taking our planet, Ho explained, his voice tense with anger. They're trying to take our bodies. With Ho's knowledge, the resistance began to plan bigger actions. The speakers, now numbering 23 across the southern regions, coordinated their efforts. Some could freeze the machines, others could extract information from them, and a few, like Day, could actually control them. We need to hit their main processing center, Ho said during a strategy meeting. It's in Old Seoul. That's where they're keeping the human test subjects. Sue listened as they planned. Her role had changed. She was no longer just a doctor or even just a creator of speakers. She had become something else, a symbol of hope, the woman who had found the enemy's weakness. They're sending new machines, Ji warned, returning from a scouting mission. Different models. They say they're immune to the voice commands. Ho frowned. They're adapting. We need to adapt faster. That night, Sue stayed late in the lab. She studied her notes, the patterns she had created. There was something missing. The commands worked, but they were still just speaking the Kryvax language in a basic way. They needed to go deeper. As dawn approached, she made a decision. She prepared her tools, sterilized a new batch of silver threads, and sat before the small mirror they used for procedures. When Min found her the next morning, he gasped in shock. Sue sat calmly at her desk, silver threads glittering across her own throat in an intricate pattern unlike any she had created before. "What have you done?" the old professor asked. Sue smiled slightly. "Found the missing piece," she said, her voice carrying a strange harmonic quality that made the nearby drones flutter. Not control, understanding. The war was entering a new phase, and Sue had just changed the rules. "They're coming." Kim Ji's voice echoed through the underground tunnels. "New units, at least 30. Everyone in the lab moved quickly. They had practiced this drill many times. Equipment was packed into hidden compartments. Maps and notes were rolled up and tucked into waterproof tubes. The most important things, the thread spools, the special needles, the diagrams of Sue's patterns, went into a metal case that Day carried at all times. Hansu remained at her table. Since putting the threads in her own throat 1 month ago, she had changed. She was quieter, more focused, and she could do things with the Kryvax technology that even Ho couldn't understand. "Sue, we need to move now." Ryung Ho came to her side. The silver lines on his neck and head glinted in the dim light. Sue looked up calmly. "No," she said, her voice carrying that strange harmonic quality. "Let them come closer." Ho stared at her. "What are you planning?" Instead of answering, Sue stood and walked to the center of the room. The few drones they kept in the lab began to circle around her, responding to some silent command. "Get everyone back," she told Ho. "I want to try something." The heavy footsteps of the new war machines grew louder above them. Dust fell from the ceiling. These weren't the regular patrol units. They were heavier, designed specifically to hunt down the speakers. When everyone had retreated to the far end of the lab, Sue closed her eyes. She took a deep breath and began to sing. It wasn't a song in any human language. The notes were strange, shifting in ways that human vocal cords shouldn't be able to produce. The silver threads on her throat glowed brightly, pulsing with each change in tone. The drones spun faster, their lights flashing in patterns that matched her song. The very air seemed to vibrate. Above them, the footsteps stopped. Sue kept singing. Sweat appeared on her forehead. The effort was clearly taking a toll on her body. Then a new sound joined hers. Park Day stepped forward, his own threads glowing. He began to sing the same strange melody, his young voice blending with Sue's. The effect was immediate. The glow of their threads brightened. The drones moved in perfect unison now. A cracking sound came from above, and dust rained down more heavily. The war machines were breaking through the floor. Ho looked at Ji, then stepped forward himself. His deeper voice added a third layer to the strange song. Min followed, then Ji, and soon all 5 of them were singing together, their voices creating harmonics that no single human could produce. The ceiling broke open. A massive metal leg punched through, followed by another. The head of a new Kryvax war machine pushed into the opening, its red sensors scanning the room. The singing grew louder. The 5 humans stood together, their threads glowing like stars in the dusty air. They were no longer individual voices, but a single, powerful chorus. The war machine froze. Its sensors flickered from red to blue. Then slowly it began to pull back, retreating from the opening it had created. The singing continued until the heavy footsteps faded completely. Only then did they stop, one by one, until only Sue's voice remained, holding a final impossible note before fading to silence. "What did we just do?" Day asked, his young face flushed with excitement. Sue smiled. "We found their weakness," she said. "Not just the command codes or the control signals, something deeper." She touched her throat where the threads were still, pulsing with light, music, harmony, patterns they can't predict. That night they gathered to hear Sue's explanation. The old hospital basement wasn't safe anymore, so they had moved to an abandoned subway tunnel beneath the city. The new machines were designed to filter out our voice commands, Sue explained. They have blocks against the patterns we've been using. But when we sang together, we created something new, harmonics that bypassed their filters. Like an old Korean pansori, Min said, his eyes bright with understanding. Many voices creating something greater than any single voice could achieve, Ho nodded. A chorus, exactly, Sue said. And I think we can use this to hit the main facility in Seoul. Over the next weeks, they practiced. Messages went out through the resistance network, calling all speakers to gather. They came from different regions. Some Sue had operated on herself, others who had been treated by those she had trained. By the full moon, 36 speakers had assembled in the old subway system. They formed what they called the chorus, groups of 6 who learned to sing the strange harmonics together. Each group specialized in different commands. Some could freeze the machines, others could turn them against each other, and a few could extract information directly from the Kryvax network. The plan is simple, Ho told them all during their final meeting. The chorus groups will create a diversion at the south entrance of the Seoul facility. While the machines are distracted, Sue and a small team will enter through the maintenance tunnels. We'll reach the central communication hub and shut down their entire network. Maps were spread out showing the old city of Seoul as it had been before the invasion, overlaid with what they knew of the current Kryvax modifications. What about the human prisoners? Asked a woman named Yuna. The silver threads on her neck were newer than most, the pattern slightly different. One of Sue's improved designs. Freeing them is our priority, Sue assured her. But first we need to disable their security systems. The night before the operation, no one slept much. The speakers practiced their harmonics in small groups. Others checked weapons and equipment. Engineers like Day prepared small explosive charges designed to disable rather than destroy. They didn't want to harm any human prisoners. Sue sat alone in a quiet corner, her eyes closed, listening to something only she could hear. Since putting the threads in her own body, she had gained a deeper understanding of the Kryvax. Their communications revealed patterns, rhythms, a kind of language beyond simple data. G found her there and sat beside her, not speaking for a long time. Finally, he said, "You've changed." Sue opened her eyes. "Yes." "Are you still?" He hesitated. "Are you still human?" Sue took his hand. Her fingers were marked with small silver burns from working with the threads, but her touch was warm, alive. "I'm still me," she said. "Just more. I can hear them, G. Not just their machines, but them, the Kryvax themselves." G looked alarmed. "What do they want? Why are they doing this to us?" Sue's face showed a mix of emotions, confusion, sadness, determination. "I don't know yet. Their thoughts are strange, alien, but I'm beginning to understand. Fragments." She closed her eyes again briefly. "There's something they fear, something they're running from. Another enemy? Something worse than them? Perhaps." Sue stood up. "But that doesn't change what we must do tomorrow. Whether they're conquerors or refugees, they have no right to experiment on us, to take our bodies." G nodded and stood beside her. "Dawn is coming soon. We should get ready." As the first light of day touched the ruins of Seoul, the chorus moved into position. The 36 speakers, divided into their groups of 6, spread out around the southern edge of the massive Kryvax facility. What had once been Seoul's central business district was now a fortress of alien metal and strange energy fields. Sue led her small team, Ji, Ho, Dae, and 4 other resistance fighters, through the old subway tunnels. They carried minimal equipment, small charges to open sealed doors, basic weapons, and medical supplies. Their most powerful tools were the silver threads in their flesh and the voices they had learned to use as weapons. "This is it," Sue told them as they reached the final tunnel. Beyond the old maintenance door lay the underside of the Kryvax facility. "Whatever happens, remember why we're fighting. Not just to drive them away, but to save those they've taken." She, touched her throat where the silver threads pulsed with her heartbeat. "Ready your voices," she said. "It's time to make the machines kneel." The first explosion shook the ground beneath their feet. The chorus had begun their attack. Han-Su led her small team through the maintenance door and into the underside of the massive Kryvax facility. 17 machines moving south. Ryung, Ho whispered, his eyes unfocused as he listened to the communications network. "They're responding to the diversion." The corridors they entered were strange, a mix of the old human building and Kryvax technology. Metal tubes ran along the walls, pulsing with blue light. The floor was smooth and slightly warm beneath their feet. Kim Ji took the lead, his ability to sense approaching machines making him the perfect scout. Park Dae followed, carrying tools to bypass any locked systems they might encounter. Su walked, in the middle with Ho and the other fighters protecting their flanks. 2 guards ahead, Ji warned, stopping at a corner. Not the usual patrol units, something different. Su stepped forward. She could feel them too now, smaller than the war machines but more complex. Their signals felt more alive. "Let me try," she said softly. She closed her eyes and began to sing. Not the full harmonic song that the chorus used, but something simpler, a question formed in tones and vibrations. Around the corner, something responded, a strange metallic clicking followed by a series of tones that matched Su's song. "They're confused," Ho translated, listening through his neural interface. "Your song doesn't match any authorized commands." "Good," Su said. "Follow me and stay quiet." She walked around the corner, still singing her question song. The others followed nervously. 2 Kryvax guard units stood there. They were unlike the massive war machines. These were smaller, about 7 feet tall, with more delicate limbs and glowing blue sensors instead of red. They didn't move to attack. As Su approached, their sensors flickering rapidly. As Su's song changed, the guard stepped aside, creating a path between them. "Go," Su whispered to her team. "Don't run. Don't show fear." They walked past the guards, who remained still, their sensors trained on Su until the humans were out of sight. "How did you do that?" Dae asked when they were safe. "I spoke to them directly," Su explained. "Not commands, but communication. They're more than just machines." They moved deeper into the facility. Twice more they encountered guards, and each time Su's strange songs allowed them to pass. Above them, they could hear the sounds of battle as the chorus created their diversion. Finally, they reached a massive door made of a material that looked like metal but flowed like water. "This is it," Ho said, consulting the facility map they had constructed from stolen data. "The central hub should be beyond this door." Dae examined the door's edges. "I can't cut through this. It's not like anything I've seen before." Su placed her hand on the door's surface. It felt cool and slightly alive, responding to her touch with tiny ripples. "Stand back," she told her team. "I need to try something different." She pressed her forehead against the door and closed her eyes. The silver threads on her throat glowed brightly, and the same glow began to spread across the door's surface, following the ripples her touch had created. For nearly a minute, nothing happened. Then, silently, the door began to separate, the flowing metal parting in the middle like curtains being drawn back. "How?" Ji began, but Su was already moving forward, her face set with purpose. What they found inside was not what they expected. Instead of a control room filled with alien technology, they entered a vast chamber with hundreds of transparent pods arranged in circles. Inside each pod floated what appeared to be a sleeping human. "The prisoners," one of the fighters whispered in horror. "What are they doing to them?" Su walked forward, drawn to the center of the room. There, a larger pod stood alone, but it didn't contain a human. Inside was a creature unlike anything they had seen before. It was small, perhaps the size of a child, with delicate limbs and paper-thin skin that glowed faintly blue. Its head was large, with no visible eyes but patterns of light moving across its surface. Tubes connected it to the pod systems and through those systems to the pods containing humans. "A Kryvax," Su said softly. "Their true form." As she spoke, the creature's head turned toward her. The light patterns changed, forming new shapes. "It knows we're here," Ho said tensely, raising his weapon. Wait. Sue held up her hand. It's trying to communicate. She stepped closer to the pod. The silver threads on her throat glowed in response to the patterns on the creature's head. A connection formed between them, not through sound but through light and pattern. Images flooded Sue's mind. A distant world dying, a species too fragile to survive. War machines built not for conquest, but for protection. A desperate journey, across space, searching for a new home. And finally, Earth, a planet with compatible biology but hostile conditions for their fragile bodies. They're dying, Sue told her team, her voice filled with conflicting emotions. Their species is nearly extinct. The machines are vessels to protect what remains of them. That doesn't excuse what they've done to us, G said angrily, gesturing at the human pods. Taking our people, experimenting on them. Sue pressed her hand against the central pod. More images came to her. The experiments, the purpose behind them. Understanding dawned on her face. Not experiments, she said. Transfers. They're trying to move their consciousness into human bodies. Their own bodies are too weak to survive, even here. That's worse, Dee exclaimed. They're stealing our bodies. Sue was silent for a moment, still connected to the Krivax being. Then she straightened and turned to face her team. They didn't understand, she said. They don't see individuals as we do. To them, a body is just a vessel. They thought they were saving themselves without harming us. She shook her head sadly. They were wrong, but not evil. A loud explosion rocked the facility. The diversion was becoming a full battle. They didn't have much time. What do we do? Ho asked, looking at the hundreds of pods. We can't free all these people quickly enough. Sue turned back to the central pod. She placed both hands on its surface and closed her eyes. The silver threads on her throat glowed brighter than ever before, and she began to sing. This song was different from any she had sung before. It carried pain and understanding, anger and compassion. It told the story of humanity, our struggles, our bonds, our will to live as ourselves. The Krivax in the pod responded, the patterns on its head flowing rapidly, matching the rhythm of Sue's song. Through their connection, they spoke without words, negotiating in concepts and emotions rather than terms. Minutes passed. The facility shook with more explosions. Finally, Sue stepped back, her song ending on a note of somber resolution. I've made a deal, she told her team. They will release all the human prisoners. In exchange, we will help them find another way to survive, one that doesn't require taking our bodies. Can we trust them? G asked, his hand still on his weapon. We can trust this one, Sue said. It's their leader, and it understands now. They have agreed to withdraw their war machines and work with us instead of against us. As she spoke, the pods containing humans began to open. People who had been missing for months or years started to wake up, confused but alive. Help them, Sue instructed her team. Get them out safely. While the others rushed to assist the awakening prisoners, Sue stayed by the central pod. The Krivax, leader's lights pulsed in a pattern that seemed almost sad. We can find a way forward, Sue told it, knowing it understood her. Your technology and our medicine. There are possibilities we haven't explored. 1 year later, Sue stood on a hill, overlooking the new research facility built where the village of Seongju once stood. War machines that had once terrorized humans now stood guard around the perimeter, protecting the work inside. In the main laboratory, human doctors worked alongside Krivax scientists, developing new bodies that could house their consciousness, without displacing humans, synthetic forms that combined the best of both species' technology. Sue touched the silver threads that still marked her throat. They had changed over the months, growing more complex as her understanding of the Krivax deepened. She could speak their language fluently now, not just control their machines. Dr. Han, a voice called from behind her. It was G, now the head of security for the facility. The delegation from the Western Alliance has arrived. They want to see the progress. Sue nodded. Tell them I'll be there shortly. As G left, Sue looked once more at the facility where former enemies now worked together. The seamstress who had once used her skills to fight now used them to heal and build. She had sewn flesh, not to make weapons or flags of war, but to create understanding. And now, where war machines had once marched, they knelt in service to a better future, all because someone had listened beyond the fear and found a voice that could speak to both worlds.